technology. Oh, that. Okay, we'll get to that here in a second. Did everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. Well, a couple of interesting side notes this morning. We read Psalm 82. Did anybody recognize a couple of verses in there that was quoted in the scroll that we looked at yesterday? Just FYI, kind of interesting. And their interpretation was it had to do with the coming of Messiah. Just, yeah, just saying, you know. So, yeah, we need to keep looking at those scrolls and see what's going on. The other thing I thought was interesting was there is a prophecy in Revelation that talks about when they build the temple, that the outer court will be left alone because it's given off to the Gentiles. So for some reason, they don't build the whole temple with the whole Gentile court. Well, when you compare that back to Ezekiel, Ezekiel says that they will build a wall between the temple and the profane thing that sits in the south. And if you've ever went and looked at it, there is, from where the temple is supposed to be, if you go directly south, there's this little, I would say, I don't know, profane thing called the Dome of the Rock. And it's just kind of interesting. And the Mosque of Omar, there's lots of stuff up there. But it's interesting because in 1968, they took back the Temple Mount, but gave the authority to run it to the Waqf, I think it's called, the Muslims. And Jordan did it. And they've always threatened that if you change it, that'll start a war. And so it was interesting. This morning, I got an email from Israel 365, just a political thing. One of the guys in the Sanhedrin has put forth a bill. I guess it's something like we would have a bill. Knesset, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's not yet. That's next year. But in the Knesset, yeah, he put forth a bill to take back the Temple Mount, basically, take full control over it. He says it's absolutely ridiculous that it's ours. Everybody knows it's ours, and we let some other foreign power run it in the middle of our country. I mean, that's just, so it's interesting to see that. Maybe nothing will come of it because it's happened before, but it's interesting to see Knesset members say, this is ridiculous. This is ours. And what he said he wanted to do, that's what caught my attention. He's like, they don't let us up there to pray. They don't let us even go into Solomon's stables because it's under where they pray. They go up there and have soccer games and play. So it's not sacred to them like it's sacred to us, and it's just ridiculous. So he wants to divide it. And anytime, you don't have to have permission or get special permission to go. Muslims go into the south, Jews go into the north, and just do it that way. Anybody wants to go pray, go pray. Open to everybody all the time, period. And it's interesting. It's like, Muslims to the south and Jews to the north. So you could probably build a temple and make a wall, and they're talking about dividing it. So I just thought that was interesting. That's what we see in the book of Ezekiel. So very, very interesting. Lots of stuff happening in that regard. And we mentioned other stuff. I just want to mention one other thing. In October 5th, 6th, and 7th, it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, there is a prophecy conference in Edmond, Oklahoma, put on by Prophecy Watchers. So if anybody's interested in going to that, I think we'll have like 30 speakers. It's one of those deals. So it should be interesting. Okay, well, what I wanted to share with you today, we've been talking a lot about different things that the scrolls come up with. A couple of weeks ago, I had a friend call. His name is Levi Morin, and he runs a small church out in California. I think it's close to Oceanside, but it's right next to a Marine base. He's a former Marine, and he's always interested in letting everyone know the truth of the scriptures. He's got a good amount of the Marines that go there that he focuses on a lot of stuff. But like a lot of us, we think about the Nephilim. We're going to touch on that here in a little bit. But the Genesis 6 problem that started and the things that are still around today because of it, basically crossbred animals and things like that. And he believes the scriptures, so he follows them. And part of his mission, since his church is geared mainly to Marines, is they have one main question. Are they still around? And how much ammo do I need to take one down? It's the only thing they're interested in. They don't want to speculate on how or what, but they, this kind of thing. And so he called me up because he was trying to figure out exactly what one looked like. And he ran across this weird word, and the rabbis that he knew didn't know what it was. So I didn't know either. I had to look it up. But it was an interesting conversation. And he told me about a passage in Genesis 36 that I was unaware was there. So we're going to look at that this morning too. But I wanted to share you something. In the King James Bible, and in most of the Bibles that are conservative, they will translate things conservatively. Okay. So you might have a weird creature attacking a village, and maybe it's a weird kind of alligator or a crazed whatever, something that we don't know about. Or maybe it's demonic, maybe it's not. And so sometimes they honestly don't know what it is. It's just a word. So, and you'll see this a lot in a lot of the Greek and other languages, the numbers are always garbled. So like Adam was 120 when Seth was born, 20, 30, 130. So, but the Septuagint says 230. How'd they get the extra 100 in there? I don't know. They just garble numbers. You see that in some of the Ethiopian scrolls that we have too. And so when it comes to breastplates, animals, colors, those get garbled a lot. It's a kind of a red, but is it like a ruby or a garnet or what kind of a stone is it? Nobody seems to really know. So those things get garbled. So I wanted to share with you a couple of things like that. There's a lot of things in the scriptures that sometimes we need to really look at carefully. So here's my eSword, and I just pulled this up, and I did a search for the word owl. And I want to share you here, like here in Leviticus, there's an owl and a nighthawk and a few other things. It's the part where you're not supposed to eat the following animals. So an owl is Bath, okay, this particular owl, Ayana, yeah. And so this is the normal word for owl. Down here, it's another type of owl, okay. And it's interesting to go through and look at these. But when you get to Isaiah, they're talking about the same thing, different kinds of birds, and one is an owl, and that's that particular word there. When you get to Isaiah 34, it's talking kind of symbolically. And it says, when Babylon falls, there's going to be these beasts in the desert that are there. And the satyr, and we know what a satyr is, but the other one is a screech owl. And people look at this and go, what is a screech owl? Well, we know what a screech owl is. This is not the word for screech owl, though. This is the word Lilith. And there is a demon called a Lilith. And without going into a whole lot of stuff, you can see here in the Strong's, it's translated screech owl. It's actually some sort of night specter. And I guess they're not sure if it's a weird owl that attacks people or if it's demonic or what it is. But this is just an example of sometimes when you see something and they're not sure how to translate it, they'll translate it in the best they can, okay? And so it's an interesting thing. And we're going to start in Genesis chapter 6 and then look at Genesis 36. We're going to see something else like that too. So basically, in Genesis, we have, starting in chapter 1, we have the creation of everything in Adam and Eve. And then you've got the story of Cain and Abel. And then you've got the expulsion from the garden. And you get to chapter 5, and it's all the kids. And then who does what with them. There's the line of Cain and the line of Seth. And these things go on. And then later on, things happen. When you get into chapters 8, 9, and 10, you get the flood. And you get actual dates. And then you get how the nations formed from the 3 kids, after, or the 12 grandkids, how it spread out. And so that's interesting too. If you ever noticed it in Genesis chapter 8, it talks about the day the flood came. It was the 17th of the 2nd month in the 600th year of the life of Noah. And then you can go to chapter 5 and add those out. So it's actually 1,656 years, 1 month and 17 days after creation that the flood occurred. And it's interesting to look at that when you start putting things out there like that. And I need to try to remember better when I hop online. It's like, hey, happy flood day. You guys realized it's exactly 4,000 and some odd years today that it clouded up and God judged the world. When you say stuff like that, people are like, well, I believe it was real, but you said that was today, and it's like, first, it's like, how do you know for sure? Well, we can look it up. But the second thing is like, that's kind of powerful. Just like when we say so many years ago today, I believe that Jesus was born on Tabernacles. So the first day of Tabernacles is when I would say, hey, if I'm right, it was exactly so many years ago today, Jesus was born. And that's kind of powerful. Or so many days ago that Jesus actually paid the penalty for our sin nature. It When you say that was today, it just makes it much more real to people. It's just like when you talk about the prophecies, baby Jesus born in a manger, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you talk about that event that happened 3 years ago that was prophesied. All of a sudden, it's like, wait a minute, that was real? Wait a minute, that probably means they're all real, which probably means I'm a wicked sinner and I need salvation. It just hones it in really well. Well, today I wanted to look at this, and this is Genesis 6. So it becomes evil and God sends a flood. So in Genesis 6, it says, it came to pass, men began to multiply on the face of the earth, daughters were born to them. And the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all whom they chose. And God said, my spirit will not always strive with man, for he is also flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. Now, there's a commentary in the Dead Sea Scrolls. You knew that one was coming. There's a commentary in the scrolls. Anyway, a lot of people look at this and say it's 120 years. Maybe that's the lifespan. And obviously it's not, because they lived to be 800 years. Right after the flood, they all lived to be about 400, like 4 or 5 generations into it. Then apparently something happened and it gets cut in half again. And everybody lived to be about 200. And then it starts trickling down. Nimrod lived to be 213, but that's just because he was killed. Abraham died peacefully at 175. And most of the Abrahamic kids, the 12 sons and all, about 120, 130. Moses lived to be 120. The Essenes, with their herbal medicine, continued to live to be about 120. There's a guy mentioned in Acts, I think it's 23 or 27, Menachem, actually mentions in the book of Acts that this was the Menachem that was in Herod's court. And we've got the story of how he came to be in Herod's court. He was an Essene making predictions, and he predicted that Herod would become the next ruler, which is not hard to do if you're just looking at scripture, because everybody's trying to kill everybody. And there's a scripture about an Idumean. And then Herod's the only guy here that's not a Pharisee, not a Sadducee, not even Jewish. And that would be the next logical thing. Let's put a secular guy up there. That'll fix the problem. And of course it didn't, but because everyone was walking in madness. But anyway, it's a really interesting story. But he was there. He was one of the 4 that came down that laid hands on the Apostle Paul and anointed him, which is some 60, 70 years later. So he would have only been in the 90s at that time. So for an Essene, he's still got a good 20 years to go, or more. But still, a 90-year-old guy, I think I'm going to hop on a donkey and go to Jerusalem. Let's go. That's just usually not something that a 90-year-old does. But it just shows the health and the herbal medicine and that kind of stuff. So there's all these things through Scripture, and we look at them and like Menachem that was in Herod's court. And then we just go on. It's like, no, there's an amazing story there. You need to slow down and look at these. So anyway, with that being the case, if it was 900 years, and then it was 400 years, and then it was 200 years, this is 120. We're not talking about lifespans. And the Dead Sea Scroll commentary actually says that God gave them 120 years to repent. There was a certain day, and you'll see this all through the scriptures. There's a certain day when God says, okay, today, I'm going to give you exactly so many years. And if you don't make a decision, I'm going to do something. And then that time comes, and you'll notice it's always to the day. If it's a couple of days off, it's because you're using the wrong calendar. That's always the way it is. When you look at Exodus chapter 12, which is the actual Exodus account, the cool thing about it is it says that this fulfilled the prophecy given to Abraham to the day. So it was exactly 400 years ago today the prophecy was given, and they were all marching out of Egypt. There's actually an account in one of the texts that there was a small segment of Jews that decided to calculate it, and apparently they used the wrong calendar, even back then, or miscalculated. And it was a few months earlier, and they said, well, today's the day, we're marching out. They all died. You don't just decide, well, today's the day of the rapture, we're just going to go quit our jobs and go do stuff. Bad decision. When it happens, it'll happen. If you have extra money in the bank or have debts, doesn't matter anymore. If it doesn't happen, we need to balance those, So we need to be very serious about prophecy, but don't take chances. Just know God's doing something. If today is the day, we don't have to worry about it. We're raptured. But I'm not absolutely sure. I'm sure the rapture is coming, but I'm not sure it's today. So that's really interesting. So the Lord, there's something really bad happened then. It was getting worse and worse. And he said, I'm not always going to put up with this. Matter of fact, I'm done. You guys got 120 years, and then 120 years to the day the flood occurred. And in the Dead Sea Scroll commentary, it's identical to this. In other words, they just picked this up and put it in their commentary and then added all the dates. When it said it was 40 years or 40 days later, they would say it's the 2nd of this month, which was a Sunday, and it happened here. And they give you all that detail. So, and I've come to trust that Dead Sea Scroll calendar pretty well. That's just my opinion. But so what's going on here? And then it says in verse 4, there were giants in the earth in those days. And the word for giant is Nephilim. And we look at that, and the word Nephal means to fall, like just if you fell down. It's used in grammar to talk about a past tense verb. There's one that hasn't got up yet, there's one that's standing, and there's one that fell. So it's past tense. Nephilim, is a masculine thing that you tack onto a word. So it's basically just fallen guys or people that fell of some sort. But what's interesting is a lot of times you have Aramaic and Hebrew words that are kind of interchanged. Like, for instance, if you know, Ben is the word for son in Hebrew. So Benjamin is son of my right hand, Ben. And yet when when you become an adult son of the covenant, it's called a bar mitzvah, not a ben mitzvah. Bar is Aramaic for son, and Ben is Hebrew, so kind of interchangeable. What I didn't know until not too long ago is the word Nephalia, not Nephilim, but Nephalia, is the Aramaic word for giant. So that's why these are all translated giants in here. There's different ways of doing it, and this is the Hebrew version of it. Means the same thing. But this is interesting. There's a couple of different theories. The main two theories are the sons of God are angels, because you see that elsewhere in Scripture, and the daughters of men, we would assume, are daughters of men. Okay. The other way of looking at it is that it's the sons of God are Sethites, or some sort of godly group, sons of God, and then daughters of men would just be daughters of non-godly men. And there is enough, you can go through, when you go through the chapters before this on Cain, Cain's descendants became very ungodly, and Seth's line stayed very godly until the 7th or 8th generation when they begun to fall. So what's interesting is people would say, well, maybe it's a Sethite Canaanite thing. And the deal is, I want to submit to you, we're talking about these guys got together and had giants. Number one, if I interbreed with my sister, and then our kids interbreed and their kids and we keep interbreeding in the same 10 people or something, eventually we have odd genetic problems. Might be giantism, might be blindness, things like that. But when you run off to, say, China, somebody totally different gene pool, and marry them, you don't have genetic problems like that. Sometimes you do, but it's not because of that. And so this whole concept of the Canaanites and the Sethites If they stayed by themselves, they might have genetic problems, but not if they all of a sudden decided to come together. It'd be the opposite. The other thing I'd draw your attention to is that it says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men. It does not say that the sons of men saw the daughters of God. So if you're going to translate it that way, you have to think about this. So the sons of God, the godly people, decided to go to the pagans that were ungodly and take wives of whom they chose. And that means I'm taking your daughter with or without your permission. And that's what godly guys do, right? Basically, they steal your daughters and rape them. No, wait, there's something not right about that. That would be if it's the sons of men and the daughters of God. That would make perfect sense. Now you could say sons of God in the sense that they were godly and now they're evil, but now they'd be like the other guys. So it doesn't quite fit. So that it's a definite thing to look at. So, and then also you think about this as being peaceful and warlike, and you read the text from Josephus, what the Sethites and the Canaanites were like. The United States government, or army rather, knows battle. You're not going to walk up and defeat them. If you got an Amish group that is pacifist, that today decided we're not going to be passive anymore. We're going to take up our pitchforks and our arms, and we're going to attack the United States government, and we're going to take their women. I don't think it's going to work. Seasoned warriors against pacifists. So there's a lot of reasons why those can't really work in here. Now, what we're going to see, or what if we had time to look at it, all of the rabbis, all of the early church fathers, all translated this angels and daughters of men. The first guy that said anything about Sethites and Canaanites, it's actually a Gnostic text, and they were trying to say that the Sethites were actually incarnated from another planet, that kind of thing, and then men are men. Later on, though, there were some church fathers in about the 3rd century that said that the Book of Enoch was fiction, which is where we get a lot of our information, and that this is actually Sethites and Canaanites, that kind of thing. So it's a really interesting section here. What I've always done is, when I was a teenager, I decided I wanted to know what charismatics believed, and Baptists and Catholics, and and then there's differences, so we ought to be able to figure this out. And so my whole idea is go back to the church fathers, the first, second generations, and see if they're all confused or if they all agree. And I found out they all agreed. And if you go through all their sermons, they're very straightforward. We're saved by grace through faith alone. The vicar of Christ is the Holy Spirit. Any guy on the planet saying he needs to control the churches is Antichrist. It's just like, ooh, this is not Catholic at all. But they believed the gifts continued. They believed in prophecy. They were premillennial. They talked about a future Antichrist. Basically what I'd always believed. But it's nice to know the ancient ones did that and would say stuff like, yeah, I wasn't sure about that 666 thing, so I went and asked John. Really? What did he say? Oh, it's just like this. Now, I can't prove that. It's not authoritative, but that sure sounds pretty cool. I trust Pastor Chuck, for instance, and if we were back at a time where Pastor Chuck said, I went and asked Peter and John both, and they are in total agreement. Here's what they told me. That's a cool testimony. So we have to look at those things. So basically, we're looking at this, and so the whole concept is there is a time when angels came down and did something, and we have genetic problems. So our main text for this, we're not going to go through it because it's a really big text, is the Book of Enoch. And it tells the story of an angel, not Satan. There was Satan and Satan's fall in the beginning, but there was an angel about 400 or 500 years into the creation, named Azazel, who came down to earth and decided to experiment. And we tend to think of it as a big sexual thing, and it may or may not have been. But the main idea seemed to be, I want to be kind of like God. I want to create my own stuff. And of course, I can't create per se, but I can take some things and mix the genetics around and make my own creation. And so according to the text, Azazel did this off, I don't know where, an island or where, but off by himself, didn't mess with anybody else. and his creations were called Sarim, and there's a little bit of text about him. It's interesting too, because then nothing major happened and he's off by himself. It's kind of like you go off by yourself and sin and stay in the closet, so to speak, and nobody gets hurt. And you come out in the open and you start teaching everybody else to do it, then the whole society falls apart. And that's kind of what we see. So the text goes on and says that a few hundred years later, there was a group of 200 angels led by an angel named Shemyaza. And they came down, landed on Mount Hermon, took an oath to do the same thing. Now you got 200 of these guys doing the same thing at different places, and it corrupted all of the society. And God judged those angels and said, I'm going to ascribe the entire sin to Azazel and condemn them. Those are the ones that Peter talks about are chained in Tartarus in 2 Peter 2. Other angels are not chained. Demons are not chained. Some of them are for various reasons. But the text talks about all that stuff. And it seems to be corroborated by 2 Peter. And if you read Clement's notes, Clement of Rome was a disciple of Peter. And in his memoirs, he said, I'm beginning to realize that the Greek version of history is not 100% accurate. So can you tell me the Jewish version? Start with creation. And Peter does, just very quickly, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Nephilim, Noah, flood, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, prophecy, Jesus, this is us. And he just kind of did that real quick. And Clement's like, that's cool, but what about the Nephilim thing? How in the world would that even work? Because, and then Peter kind of explained how it would work. And so this is all in his memoirs. And so we have stuff like that from the church fathers. So again, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Bible passages, and the church fathers all teaching the same thing. So with this in mind, I want to look at some of these things. So there were giants in the earth in those days. And so after that, when the sons of God came to the daughters of men and they bore children to them, these things were mighty men of old, men of renown. So something really interesting with those. Now, what I want to share with you is, here's some passages. Now this is, actually, is this the one I want to do? Okay, not here yet. Hold on. What I want to do, I'm going to take this verse here, verse 4, and I want to flip over and look at a couple of others. So here is what it says in the Septuagint. The Septuagint numbers are usually off, but the texts are interesting. So it says, the Lord God said, my spirit will certainly not remain among these men forever, because their flesh, their days will be 120 years. Okay. And their versification is different. In theirs, it's verse 5. Now the giants were upon the earth in those days. It says giants rather than other stuff. Okay. And when the sons of God, who were wont to go with the daughters of men, bore children to them, they were the giants of old, the men of renown. So it's interesting just to see this kind of a commentary. So it's the giants of old, the pre-flood that we're talking about. And this whole phrase here, after that, it makes people wonder. So at a certain time, certain happened. And then after that, something happened again. It's kind of a confusing thing. So if we go to the Targums, now the Targums are the Aramaic translations of the Old Testament, started by Ezra when they came back. For the 70 years, they all spoke Aramaic. Remember, bar instead of ben. It's like a lot of my friends would say, yeah, can I use something other than a King James? It's just a little too, shout and wilt and weird stuff like that. It's like you could get used to it really easy, but they like a more modern translation. So he did this for them. Let's see here. So it says, let me find it here. Oh, here it is, verse 4. Got to get back to verse 4. So it says this, and the words are garbled here, but you can tell what we're looking at. Shemyaza and Azazel, who fell from heaven, were on the earth in those days, and also after their fall. In other words, the sons of the great had gone in with the daughters of men, and they bore to them. And these are whom they were called men who were of the world, men of names. So you can see the translation's a little more woody, but I thought it was interesting that they actually mention that here. And most of us know about in Leviticus, we have the scapegoat ritual. You know, you take it out in the wilderness and there's all sorts of interesting things with it. Well, we call it scapegoat. That's another one of those times when they kind of change words on you a little bit. In the Hebrew, it's very clear. It's the Azazel goat, and it's referring to what this guy did way back when. And it's an interesting ritual. They take the goat and they tie a scarlet thread around one of the horns, and they take another scarlet thread and tie it on the handle to the door, the great door in the temple. And then you're not supposed to walk more than a mile on the Sabbath, and that is a high Sabbath. So they have these guys stationed, and they start from Jerusalem, and the first guy walks him almost a mile up to the Mount of Olives and gives him off to another guy, and he walks almost a mile, gives him off to someone else. And there's these 12 stations that go out about 12 miles. Then they do a ritual with the Azazel goat, and then they throw him off the cliff. And it's at a specific place called Bet Hadido, which, according to the ancient text, is where Azazel is chained. You know how, like in Revelation, it talks about how at a certain point, the 4 angels that are chained under the Euphrates are released. That hasn't happened yet. So that means right now, somewhere under, and the Euphrates is long, who knows where it's at, but under the Euphrates River, somewhere, there are 4 angels that are chained. And you really don't want those guys out. But there's a certain day, month, year, it says in Revelation, that they will be released, and they wreak havoc. So they take this goat out to the same spot where Azazel's supposedly chained, and they throw him off the cliff, and he's destroyed. Well, if the sacrifice is pure, then both of the scarlet threads turn white. And there's some interesting other things. The Mykonor doors are supposed to open by themselves. There were all these rituals and these miracles that happened during all of these festivals. Incidentally, it's kind of cool that in the Talmud, it says that all those miracles, like the color changing and the doors opening and all that stuff, the angel troubling the water, all those things that happened on the rituals, they just stopped one day, and nobody knows why. But it makes this little comment in the Talmud. It was about 40 years before the destruction of the temple. We must have done something bad. Don't know what that might be, but isn't that interesting? So these are from people who reject Messiah, have nothing to do with him, don't care about him at all. But something happened about 40 years before the destruction of the temple. Around 32 AD, more or less, something happened, and all those miracles just stopped happening. Nobody knows why. It's just interesting. All those little things that you catch, and it's like, that's pretty substantial. You know, if I was a Baptist that didn't believe in tongues and I wrote a book on how that's crazy, there is no such thing, yeah, that's because I'm a Baptist. If I'm a Pentecostal preacher and all of a sudden I write a book like that, that's something else. That's just like, so these are guys that reject Messiah that shouldn't really want to be saying stuff like that, that say, yeah, there's something to that. Pretty interesting. So anyway, so the basic story on this then is that they're chained up, and that's where we get demons from. Demons are the spirits of the Nephilim, and then there's fallen angels. They're separate creatures. There's human beings. When you and I die and go to heaven, we're not going to become angels or cats or dogs or anything else. We're going to be glorified. We're going to be a lot better than this, but we are still people. So those are kind of weird myths and stuff. Well, let me show you in Genesis. This is in Genesis, but this is if we go to the text. Let me go back to here and show you a couple things. Okay, so this is okay. Yeah, let me just do that here too, so we can look at it in context. Sorry, I'm glitching again here. Okay, so if we go to Genesis chapter 36, this is what my friend showed me a couple of weeks ago. The Marine that wants to know how much ammo it takes to take these things down. I'm with him. You know, Well, most of us are scared about letting weird people into our houses because it could cause a demonic door to be open. That's a legitimate thing. You don't believe in demonic, then who cares? Well, if these things were based on genetic manipulation, some of them could still be around. If that's the case, I'm right there with him. How much ammo do I need to take one of these down if one showed up at my door? There's probably none here in America, but who knows what's in the Amazon, and you're going to get taken wherever they tell you to go. So, incidentally, there's a Dead Sea Scroll, not just Enoch, but there's a Dead Sea Scroll of that kind of literature called the Book of Giants. And it actually tells you how they go about creating Nephilim. Not enough for you to really repeat the process, but when you read the thing, it's interesting. The example is if you take a bunch of donkeys and a bunch of horses and you breed them together, you'll create a unstable life form. And we know that because a donkey's got so many chromosomes, I forget how many, and a horse has so many, and a mule is right in between. So most things have something in their genetics that would cause that not to work. But there are certain species that you can. Now, the mule, we know mules to be sterile, but they're not always sterile. Almost all of them are. And what they would do is they would do these things in sets of 200. So if you got 200 horses and 200 donkeys and you had 200 mules, there'd be a few of them that could be reproduce. Not too many. And they did the same example with sheep and goats. You can actually put those together. And some people do because they have a little more meat on them, and stuff like that. But they explained that. And then you could take the half sheep, half goat, the mule, that's things like that, and you could begin to do other things with them. And you can understand that. Today we understand the chromosome count and that there's these certain chromosome things that prevent things like that from happening. And you can override them if you do them right. Now, I have no idea how to go about that, but if some angel came and said, here's the blueprint, it's dog, cat, hamster, turtle, in this order, and it would work, it wouldn't be hard to just follow directions. And that's kind of what we have with Canaan. According to one of the other Dead Sea Scrolls, after the flood, he decided to go to Mount Hermon, which is where this whole thing began, but that's in Shem's territory. So you'll notice what he did is he traveled up the coast and created a small settlement in Sidon. That was the very first one. Sidon was a really perfect place to do a port. But if you'll notice, looking at a map, if you're coming up along the coast of Israel, up into Lebanon, and here's Zidon. So if you start from there, it would be the closest place on the coast to go straight to Mount Hermon. So he's making an expedition there, and he finds writings. He begins to follow directions. And the next thing we're told in the Bible is that there are giants in the land of Canaan. Not just people, but large clusters of grapes that it takes two guys to pick these up and move them. Remember all those stories out of the Old Testament. So that's basically the story that they give. So apparently there's some truth to it, because modern science would say, oh, you can't do that. There's too many problems. Well, this is how they fix the problems. And you look at it and you go, that actually might work. And today there's all these different things. I remember reading a report from the BBC 3 or 4 years ago. They decided that there is a certain kind of thing that would cure a human being from a certain disease, but it was really hard to synthesize. And they figured out if they took a cow, destroyed its immune system, changed the immune system, the cow would produce these things. Of course, you have to have the cow inside of a sterile place with no germs and stuff. And they explained how they did that. First they destroyed the immune system, and then they started rebuilding it. And it was by using a hamster and a turtle DNA put together. And then you added it to the cow, and then you added the cow DNA to something else. And it did it just right and started producing these certain enzymes that way. And then they had this, 10 or 20 cows all hooked up to computers, and they were filtering the blood, pulling these things out. And so it's interesting to me. I'm thinking like, okay, I can see us learning to do stuff like that. But my first question is like, how did you figure that out? How did you even think to go that far? Somebody believes these texts. That's what I'm saying, thinking. And we're told that in the end times, it's going to be just like in the days of Noah, which is a very spooky thought. So anyway, let's go to Genesis 36, and I'll show you. This is one that I passed by because this is just Esau's descendants. So it's going to say Esau had so many kids, each kid had so many grandkids, and they went here and here, and they formed this city and that city, and this is how they spread out. And that's the whole chapter. It's just the kids, where they went. So you read this and you go, okay, I'm done. What is this? But there's an interesting passage in there, just like that Lilith passage and just like the sons of God passage, just kind of almost in common. But when you get down to verse 24, it talks about all these people. And it says, these are the sons of, let me flip back to a King James so we can look at the real Bible. Okay. I'm just used to the names. Every time the same exact story, but everybody's going to spell the same name in a different way. There's 20 ways to spell everything. Anyway, so these are the children of Zibeon, and he was one of the sons of Esau. So now we're talking about, through Zibeon, 2 grandsons of Esau. And they were Asia and Anah. Okay? And we could just go on from that point. But this is what it says. And yes, in case you were wondering, this is the Anah that found the mules in the wilderness. You know that story? And when he was feeding his father's donkeys. Okay, now we're going to go on. The children of Anah were, and it goes on down the list. So this is what's interesting about this. So let me ask you, if he was the guy that invented mules, you know, that could change a society, for instance, a new pack rat animal type thing. Or if he invented the machine gun, or if he was the one that actually managed to marry the princess and take over the army and create a new empire. Those are big things. To stub my toe and find a bug, what's the point of the story? I mean, obviously this was a big, big deal. What is it? Well, he found some mules. And who did they belong to? Did he get in trouble? Did it start a war? Well, you know the story. No, I don't know the story. That's the problem. What's the story? So this is what's really interesting. And again, this is one of those things where the King James translators is going to translate it mule. Is it a mule? What is a mule? Well, mule's a donkey-horse combination. So what's going on here? Well, let's go to here, and we'll start at the top, and I want to show you some really interesting things. I knew about this. I didn't know Genesis 36 talked about it. The mule thing threw me off. So here's Genesis in the King James. It says, these are the children of Zibeon, both Aja and Anah. And yes, this was the Anah who found the mules. And the word in Hebrew is yem. Okay, the word for mule is pered. Like a par is a donkey or a horse, that kind of stuff. So it's not a pared, it's not paradim, it's not parot, so it's not a female mule, or it's not a mule at all. What is a yem? Well, nobody knows. A yem is a yem, okay? He found something, and they're going to translate it, you know, mules, for whatever reason. So if we look at the Septuagint, this is Brenton's again. Septuagint says things a little differently. These are the sons of, let's just say Zebulun. Again, the Greek. So, and this is both Aja and Anah. And yes, this is the Anah who found the Yamin in the wilderness when he was tending the beasts of his father. Oh, that's a little bit different now. So what is a Yamin? Now, if it was plural, a Yam, we always change the J, the Y's to J's. I don't know. It's instead of Yahovah, it's Jehovah. Just what we do. It's a Roman thing. So this is still the word yam. If it's plural, it would be yamim, not yamen. So this is actually a word. It means something. And again, I have no clue what it means. And nobody else did either. So let's look at another translation. This is the Targum. Remember the ones that said, oh, Shemiyaza and Azazel? They're the ones that started this thing. So The Targum says this: these are the sons of Zebulun, Aya and Anna. And yes, this is the Anna who found the giants in the desert when he tended the asses of his father Zebulun. Now, if he found a Nephilim tribe and something happened, that would be an interesting story. That's not I stubbed my toe and found a bug or stole somebody's mule. If everybody else had them, that wouldn't be a big deal. But he found some giants, something connected with Nephilim. So that's what I thought was really interesting. Now, if we go to the story is given in the book of Jasher, and I want to share this story with you. And this is what my friend was calling about. It's like, we've read the story. I've talked to 3 rabbis. We figured out what the words mean. They're legit, except for one word we cannot figure out. It's like, okay, well, we'll work on that. So, Palestinians Targum. Oh, this is interesting. The Palestinian Targum, it's a different version, says these are the sons of with Aya and Anna. And he is the Anna who coupled the Ongers, which is like a donkey or a horse of some sort, with the she-asses. So that makes it sound like he's the first to create mules. So that could be a big deal, could change the society. But after a time, he found mules, which had come forth from them while he was tending the asses of his father. Now, this is a strange translation. Okay, if I got horses and donkeys and I'm making mules, and then one day I find that they have mules, wow, what a discovery. Yeah, there's something not right there about it, the way this is translated. But this shows you probably how they got the idea. Maybe it's mules we're talking about. Maybe yam is a different word for mule. Well, no, it's a type of giant. It's a type of creature that was put together by mixing, and it was a not anything to do with donkeys. So here is the text from the book of Jasher, and I want to share this with you. These were the sons of Shobal. There were Alvin. I like guys named Alvin. My son's named Alvin and spelled after this. Most Alvins have an I in their name, but okay. So anyway, and Manath, Ebal, Sepho, Onam, these were the sons of Shobal. And so this one here, this Zepho, that's actually a Z, we normally look at it. He's the one that's talked about a lot, the cool things that he did. He was the one that pulled the city-states together and founded the Roman Empire, even though he was a grandson of Esau. There's a whole story to it and how everything comes together. And it's actually helps us figure out some of the end-time prophecies. But that's a different story. So that's one set. And then there are the sons of Zebulun, who was Ajah and Anna. And yes, this is the same stuff. This was the Anna who found the Yamin. So now this is plural, but it's Yem. So it's a Yem, it's a Yam, something like that. These Yamim in the wilderness. They're a type of giant. They're a type of creature that is an artificially created creature from somebody somewhere. Found them in the wilderness when he fed the asses of Zebulun, his father. Now, so what are these things? I'm glad you asked. We finally have a text to tell us what a Yamim is. They're fearsome beasts. While he was feeding his father's asses, donkeys, he led them into the wilderness at different times to feed them. And one day he brought them to one of the deserts on the seashore opposite the wilderness of the people. We could probably figure out approximately where that is. And while he was feeding them, behold, a heavy storm came up from the other side of the sea and rested upon the asses that were feeding there, and they all stood still. And this is kind of interesting. We'll come back and say why in a minute, but a heavy rainstorm just came out of nowhere, and everybody hunkered down until the rainstorm was over. Okay, then the interesting thing happens. After the rainstorm, it says, and afterward, about 120 great and terrible animals came out of the wilderness at the other side of, and that shouldn't be in there, the other side of the sea. And they all came to the place where the asses were, and they placed themselves there. Now, those animals, from their middle downward, were in the shape of the children of men. And that could just simply mean they stood upright. Bears stand upright a lot and fight, stuff like that, but normally they go on all fours. These at least were walking on two legs. So these animals from the middle downward were in the shape of men. From the middle upward, they had the likeness of bears and kephas. And a kepha is a type of monkey. It's a Hebrew word for a certain type of monkey. Basically means they were furry. Basically all it means. But they had tails behind them from between their shoulders, reaching down to the earth. And their tails were like the tails of the, another one of those words that's hard to pronounce, Duchipeth, something like that. That's what my friend called to ask about, and I'm like, I've often wondered, but I have no clue what it is. These animals came and mounted and rode the asses and led them away, and they went away until this day. They never found them. But this is interesting here. One of these animals approached Anah, this is why it's his story, approached Anah and smote him with his tail, and then he fled from that place. When he saw the work, the damage that the tail had done to him, the work, he was exceedingly afraid of his life, and he fled and escaped to the city. He related this to the sons of his brothers, what had happened to him, and many men went to seek the asses, but could not find them. And Anah and his brothers went no more to that place from that day following. They were greatly afraid of their lives. So this is an interesting story here. Number one, I think we've all probably walked up to a tall horse, and if you're not paying attention, the horse hits you with a tail, and that could actually do some damage, but it's not life-threatening. So this is a type of creature that could hit you with his tail, and if you're not careful, it could kill you. There's enough force behind it. So that's not a monkey. They can grab things with their tails, but they can't really hit you. I'm thinking of like an alligator, because they always tell you if you're stupid enough to try to sneak up on an alligator, don't sneak up by the tail. Everybody says, well, I'll go behind him and I won't get bit. Yeah, you will. That tail is amazing. He'll know there's something there. He'll hit you with the tail, and at the very least, it'll knock you down. He'll pivot, and then you're on the floor like this with these jaws coming at you. Never, ever sneak up on an alligator that way. The mouth is interesting. If you sneak up on an alligator, like if you have to for some reason, and he's coming at you, you can with one hand push the mouth down. He's got these incredible jaws. Once he clamps down, you ain't going to get it open. But very little muscles to open, so you can actually hold it closed. Don't try this at home. But I'm just saying, some things like some of the larger reptiles would have a tail that could actually injure you. And so, not that these guys are reptiles, but they have a tail like a this one here. I read and I translate well, but I can't speak worth a darn. My wife can attest to that. So what my friend did is he called up and he says, do you have any clue what this is? And I said, no, but apparently it's got a tail that can hurt you. Yeah. And so actually what was cool, I was trying to research it, didn't get anywhere. And my son, Alvin, spelled with an A, and I think a lot of you met him this week. He was here just for a second. He was doing some research. He loves Hebrew like I do. And I think he found it. That name is a name for a Hebrew. It's a Mediterranean, not Mediterranean, an Asian bird. It's over there in that area, and it's not that it's feathered or anything. This is a very unusual bird. The bird is about this long, just like a small robin, parakeet, something like that. It's about this long, but its tail is 1.5 to 2 times as long as the bird is. And that's probably all we're meaning. If this was a 4-foot tall creature, the tail is going to be 6 to 8 feet long. Now, if it's got muscles and it can control it, and it's that long, think of me with a horsewhip. I could kill you easily with a horsewhip if you're not paying attention, maybe even if you are, if I'm really good at flicking it just right. This has got muscles on the side and some force behind it too. So, and then who knows if it is reptilian, if Some reptiles used to have spikes on their tails. That would do a lot of damage, like hitting you with one of those ball and clubs. So it's an interesting story. So Alvin figured that out, and I let him know. So he was really pleased. The only question left is, how much ammo do I need to take one down? I want to know before I go out there. And he was telling me all sorts of stories about in Afghanistan, things that are going on. One thing I didn't know is the largest underground church is in China. I knew that. But then the second largest underground church currently is in Iran because of Jeremiah 20 or 49, the prophecy. So they're growing pretty good. The third largest underground church is in Afghanistan. Very interesting. That's where they got the Taliban and everything. Persecution tends to purify the church. So interesting. But he was telling me all these weird animals they have over there. Cats and what looks like a regular desert cat or iguana. Don't want to mess with them. Those things over there, they're not scared of people. And basically the general rule is something moves, you shoot it. If it's not Taliban, it's something you still want to shoot. I don't care what it is. Something's going to come out of those rocks. So really interesting. And he had some very weird stories. But I just wanted to share this with you. So basically the story for Nephilim is that pre-flood, they were created. And the text goes on and talks about the angels created Nephilim. And then there were three different clans. And the Lord sent a civil war between them. So we actually do have a lot of history. And the Dead Sea Scrolls mention them. The church fathers mention them. This is the one thing that most people tend to stay away from because it's just a little too strange. Like talking donkeys with Balaam and a guy dying and being in an airtight tomb for 3 days and 3 nights isn't strange enough for you. You know, the Bible is filled with things like this, but it's pretty interesting. So this is one that I didn't know about, and I just thought I would share this with you. So if there's any questions on strange things like that. Oh, the one thing I mentioned, it was interesting that he mentioned to me that, and I've heard this from a couple of other people, the weird thing about them, and again, their tail starts from here and goes down. That kind of seems like a reptilian alligator type tail. But the fact that there was a big rainstorm, then they appeared. I didn't think much about it because a rainstorm would get everybody freaked out and they would just run. All animals would, I would think. But they were talking about how when you talk about things like Bigfoot, and a lot of people don't believe they exist. Some people think they do, and they're just some sort of animal. A lot of people think it's a demonic manifestation. A lot of us begin to think now, as far as like aliens, Roswell, that kind of stuff, it's a demonic trick. I mean, it would be really perfect to have our friends from another plane of existence that came to help us after the evil ones were raptured. I mean, it would make a great play into the Antichrist, and you just show a being can heal a couple of people will fall for it. So these are all demonic things, I think, but there could be animals related. But we have that concept of crossing animals. And that's why it's dangerous, because it angered God doing the experiments. And we've got other texts that talk about how far they went with some of the experiments. So again, we need medicine, preferably herbal medicine, the way the Dead Sea Scrolls teach. Doctors are fine, nothing wrong with taking aspirin, trying to take care of yourself. If you're dying, do an experimental drug, see what happens. But when we get to the place where they begin to manipulate DNA, even for just fixing a problem, hopefully it would fix the problem. But that's where you want to start thinking about it. It's not that it's the mark of the beast, but if you're not supposed to mess with DNA, you're going to get a new body anyway. And I'm not telling you not to go to doctors, and what we're doing now probably is not a big deal. It'll fix you or kill you. but we're entering that era where the old ones would be saying, okay, this is where it got weird last time. This is where we step back and say, be very careful. I'm not anti-vax at all. I would just say wait a couple of decades, make sure it's not going to cause problems like we do with all the others. And then there still could be problems, but this is something we look at this and say, why even go there? Well, because it could be relevant in our time. Even if they don't do anything like this, we got those cows. I don't know if you've ever looked at it when they first started doing the genetic experiments. They took the gene from a jellyfish and put it into a hamster and actually got a glowing hamster. And they tried it on mice and they tried it on cats. You could still do this on look on YouTube. They tried it for on gibbon monkeys and they never could get it to take. And I think they finally did, but it just experiments just to see if they can. And so if you could get good at this, you could theoretically take DNA from an extinct dinosaur egg or something and maybe bring it back. So I don't know why you'd want to, raptors and such. But we've had all sorts of different movies about that kind of thing. But it's just things we got to be very careful with. And I don't think we have too many years left. But then again, if we don't have too many years left, this is the time it gets really weird. So just to be okay with that. So any questions on Dead Sea Scrolls or Nephilim or hmm yeah. And according to the text, the pre-flood world got really, really messed up. I mean, really messed up. And Noah and his sons and their daughters were pure. They had no tainted DNA. And so there was a flood. They took just the Lord. If you look careful, he didn't. They didn't go out and hunt a lion cub, for instance. The Lord brought them to him. So he opened the doors, and here's all these animals not eating each other, just coming into the ark. It was all designed by the Lord. So these were all pure animals. And that one text confuses a lot of people because in the King James it says the sons of God, and then after that, when the sons of God came, and it's like, wait, you mean it happened twice? And it's like, well, according to the text, no. The angels were chained up. It was obliterated. The swift judgment and things that are decreed now probably would make any angel tremble at thinking about trying something like that again, according to the text. But we have all of those records left over. Most were destroyed, but these were written on stone. And apparently, I mean, if Canaan could just waltz in somewhere, find some records, start playing around with herbs, and the next thing you've got giants in the land of Canaan, that's logical. And it talks about things like that. So there's some really interesting text. So we can tend to do that. As a matter of fact, it actually pre-flood there were the Nephilim, the giants, and then there was something called an Elu. And apparently human beings had tried to do the same thing as what they were doing, and our experiments went horribly wrong. So it was a weird system. But usually when you mess with genetics, you get people that have leukemia or something like that, and they die. That's about all that happens. But apparently there's ways to do things. And it's spooky to think. I mean, if China and Russia, for instance, are arch enemies, were to try something and make a superhuman, either through drugs or genetic, if it can be done and they're beginning to do it, there's going to be people over here saying we've got to at least do the same thing or we'll be taken over. We've got to have all the technology, got to be on top of everything. So, even if it would be illegal, there would be some experiments going on. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you get a guy that's twice as strong as the average person with better eyesight, better hearing. That's the quicker reflexes. That's the perfect soldier. Yeah. So. Mhm. Mhm. Hmm. And sometimes they can fix it. Yeah. Yeah. And to fix a problem is cool, but to try to make you into something else is where you're crossing the line. And that's going to be blurred. I mean, if we've got doctors that will gladly put you to death if you ask, that violates the Hippocratic Oath, and abortion too. It's like, you know, there's always going to be people that have problems, which is why we need to have free speech, a Second Amendment, stuff like that. Everybody does, and it keeps everyone. And that's the spooky part. What if it can, but it decides on the flip side to eliminate Christians because they're going to get leukemia later on? You know, it's spooky. It's probably what some people would hope for. Yeah. The interesting thing about the new AI stuff, I haven't played around with it because I think even if I'm not, I think everybody else would be scared of it. I don't want it playing when Bible study comes. People are going to freak out. But I thought I would. I was looking something up, and I put, oh, I had a clicking in my ear, and I wanted to look up to see, is that dangerous or not a big deal or whatever. So I put clicking in my ear, and it came up just regular chat. I mean regular search, and it said, oh, it's called whatever, and it's just one of those things. And I thought, well, I probably need to put clicking in the ear dangerous, and then it would tell me if I need to get this checked or whatever. Well, I did that, and it erased what I'd put before, and I just had dangerous. And when I clicked on it, it went up instead of down. So it pulled down the chat GPT. So all I searched for was the word dangerous. You would think it would come back and say, it's a noun, it means this. It didn't, though. It said, I don't think I want to continue this conversation. That's all it said. And I'm thinking, like, are you serious? If I managed to get to a microphone and said, someone's breaking in my door, it's dangerous, I'm going to die, please send help, and it's going to say, I don't think I want to continue this conversation, it's just weird. Anyway, it could have a lot of benefits, but and I know some Christian groups that are saying we can get the stuff, reprogram it, make it a Christian one. Well, do it then. Please do. Balance of power. But it's just something to watch out for. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a definite problem. I'm sure it started with that because that would be the easiest to do. A lime and a lemon, make a lemon, or something like that. But there's been some studies that our food is not necessarily bad, but not as good. Like I read one study that said broccoli 50 years ago compared to now has 30% less calcium in it. And you're thinking, why would I care? Well, if it keeps going that rate, you'd have to eat this much vegetables a day to survive. I mean, we're going to have to start taking um, supplements or something. Yeah, it can. And that's which is why one of the prophecies in the scroll is talking about it towards the end time, we have to have our own herbal medicine people in our church. You're not a real church unless you have a pastor that loves you with all his heart, a prophecy expert, and an herbal medicine guy. That's their definition. So it's just like, there you go. Yeah. Well, we're working on the herbal medicine stuff, but like for instance, I think I eat fairly well. I eat Mexican almost every day, so I got to be okay. But I try to eat vegetables and stuff, but I developed this weird nervousness type thing, and it apparently is nothing dangerous, or I'd be dead by now because it was 4 or 5 years, and it wasn't. It was getting worse slightly, but it was just an annoyance. Mainly, if I'm up doing something, I'm fine. But if I sat down and relax, the slightest little thing like that, I would literally jump and I'd be halfway out the room. It's like a PTSD type thing. I've never been in military, so I don't know what that was. Come to find out, your your nervous system can be depleted and destroyed, the sheaths around it, by not having enough of B vitamins. And so the answer is to megadose on B1. There's a certain kind that goes straight through the fat, and that's what I started using. And it was amazing because I had this problem for about 5 years. I quadrupled dosage myself on this vitamin B1 for 4 days. And at the end of the 4 days, it was like my body just, wow, I'm okay now. Now it tends to come back once in a while, but it's interesting. But I should be getting plenty of vitamin B1 in my food, but apparently I'm not. It could be a genetic thing that I'm not absorbing it right, or I'm eating bad Mexican. Is there such a thing? No, but I mean something like that. Oh, okay, all right, glad. But I mean, it's interesting, lots of stuff. And so it's like you're told you get weird stuff. You've just got to take on your diet and your stuff and go forward with it. Mm-hmm. 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 And the thing is, we always get called conspiracy theorists and stuff. It doesn't matter if these guys are trying to kill you or they honestly think they're trying to help you. Doesn't matter. Is the food currently good or bad for you? And that's the thing. So I mean, maybe they're trying to help, and tomorrow they'll get super broccoli and it'll be perfect. Okay, maybe. But let's wait a few decades and see. So it's that kind of stuff. I'm excited to think that most of us catch some wacky disease and die in our 60s. I'm getting close to 60, so. But I'm excited not for that, but for the fact that the Essenes are saying if you take the herbal medicine supplements and follow directions, there's no reason why you can't live to be 120. And apparently they all did. There's all these different writings and questions like, how do you guys live so long? Well, we do this. So, and maybe I've messed up myself for 50 years. Maybe I never make it to 120, but I know if I start eating junk food, I'll be dead in a couple of years if that's all I eat. If I start eating health food, I ought to extend my life some. And the longer we can be here and talk to people and witness, the better. And if the rapture happens tomorrow, it doesn't matter, we go home. But if it doesn't, I don't want to be in bed in pain. I'd rather be out witnessing. So something we need to pay attention to. And most people won't believe this, and I don't care. It's just like there are these manuscripts and they go together and they paint a story, you know. So something to study. No. Hmm. And they could be lying to you, but I'm almost positive if it says that it is GMO, it probably is. So, yeah, good stuff. One interesting note, most of you probably have heard, if you ever follow L.A. Marzulli, he did an expose on the Paracas skulls, and he thought they were Nephilim. Everybody said, no, they're not. The DNA came back that they're not human, whatever they are. Different enough that if you tried to mate with one of them, you would not, normally, you would not have kids. So they're not human enough, whatever they are. But apparently The way their skulls are, they had long necks, so they could be what's left over from the Anakim, the long-necked ones in Bible times. But apparently they traveled down into South America, and at one point there was some sort of a slaughter. The people down there didn't like them for whatever reason and killed them all off, and that's where the skulls are still at. But doing the DNA testing, what I thought was interesting, they were trying to date them approximately. The youngest skull is about 1,000 years old. Now think about that a minute. We have Nephilim creatures at 1100 AD down in Peru, and that's, dangerous. That's why they slaughtered them. There's rough rumors about like the giant of Kandahar and other creatures and stuff. I apparently not around here, but there might be something to the Sasquatch idea, especially if it's demonic and storms, and it's just something not to worry about, but to know such a thing has existed in the past. And so we need to be careful with we just really need to work on our herbal medicine. Fresh fruits, grow stuff in our gardens, might save our lives. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and stop because it's lunchtime, I think.